Welcome everybody, and for those of you just tuning in, my name is Daniel Coleman and I'm the founder and CEO of Future Travel Experience, and it is my pleasure to host the first of our dedicated Biometrics Summit sessions, which we have developed in close collaboration with our key show partner, NEC. We decided to go all in on biometrics again for Virtual Expo because we have believed for a long time that biometrics technology will be at the heart of the end-to-end travel experience of tomorrow. It is our view that COVID-19 will accelerate the speed at which this will happen, and we want to help the industry get there as fast as possible. This summit will deliver case studies and lessons learned from first movers that have been through implementations and also facilitate important discussions on how we can overcome the challenges to the mass adoption of biometrics. This session has a fantastic lineup of leading industry executives who have deep understanding and experience in the subject matter, and I'm delighted to introduce them to you now. I'm honored to say that up first, we will hear from Diane Sabatino, the new Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Field Operations at the US Customer and Border Protection Agency. And then we will hear from Christian Drager, the VP of Customer Experience at Star Alliance, and Rafi Berakim, the Senior Vice President and Chief Experience Officer for NEC Corporation of America, on the work that they have been doing together to support Star's frequent flyers going forward. And then we will hear from Dave Wilson, the Director of Airport Innovation at the Port of Seattle, about the unique technology and policy approach to biometrics being taken at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. It's going to be fascinating, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their participation today. After we hear from our speakers, we will move to a group panel discussion to reflect on what we have heard and share views on some key opportunities and challenges. So first, let's head to Washington. Diane, congratulations on the new role. Firstly, before you give your keynote, how have you been settling in over there in Washington?
Very well, thank you. Excited to be in Washington, D.C. again. It's been about 15 years since I've spent any significant amount of time in the National Capital Region.
Good, pleased to hear it. So our audience is now all yours for your opening keynote. So please tell us how USCBP will work under your new leadership to collaborate and further secure and enhance the travel experience while protecting the privacy of all travelers.
Well, good afternoon. So thank you so much. It's great to join you today at the Future Travel Experience Virtual Expo. And thank you so much for the kind introduction and the invitation to kick off the Biometrics Summit. I recently started my new role as a Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner, but previously had served as the Director of Field Operations in our Miami and Tampa field offices for the last few years. And I've been involved in innovation projects going back probably about 5-6 years at the national level, even for my previous role. But this is my first time participating at this event. While CBP has participated for many years, we really find that it's been a valuable forum for us to engage in and collaborate with our key stakeholders in the air travel industry. We certainly have a lot to discuss this year, given the extraordinary circumstances of an ongoing pandemic and its impact on air travel. And as many of you know, CBP has been implementing our vision of a secure, seamless, and touchless travel experience with our air travel partners well before COVID-19 impacted us. But the pandemic makes the need for a secure, touchless travel experience more essential than ever. Our resources have been regularly put to the test as international travel to the US has set records for arrivals and spending over the last several years. And now in 2020, our mission being so significantly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, we're down to processing just a few thousand passengers a day. But in the meantime, we're not sitting idly by waiting for the day that travel may resume in the significant volumes again. We're actively using this time to transform air travel into that world-class system that leverages technology, resources, and probably most importantly, our stakeholder partnerships as we prepare for the return of travelers. But I'm excited to share with you our plans to support the travel recovery efforts. We have a clear authority and responsibility to confirm the identity of all international travelers. And we have implemented biometric facial comparison technology to automate this process to further secure and streamline travel. And we have a proven record of success in public-private partnerships as the best way to fulfill the congressional mandate that we have for a biometric entry-exit system. Currently, we've deployed biometric exit with the airline and airport stakeholders at 20 airports, encompassing a total of 21 terminals. We're going to continue to expand biometric exit with our air travel partners to meet that security mandate and support innovation efforts. But it doesn't stop there. because instead of solely focusing on implementing biometric exit to complement the initial biometric entry process that began back in 2004, where we were just simply taking fingerprints, CBP has built a facial biometric matching program known as the Traveler Verification System that could be used to support the entire travel journey wherever identity verification is required. So specifically, CBP can now offer our stakeholders identity as a service throughout the travel process, including check-in, bag drop, TSA screening, and departure to further secure and streamline the travel process. So facial biometrics provides several benefits for CBP, the airlines, airports, and travelers, including an important layer of security, also protecting the traveler's identity, enabling an efficient and streamlined inspection process, but also enhancing the customer experience. And I want to emphasize the facial biometric process is touchless, a key benefit that's even more critical in today's environment as we work together to prevent the transmission of pathogens. With this technology, our air partners have reported, one example, an A380 airplane boarding in 20 minutes, a significant enhancement to the boarding process itself. And to complement the facial biometric boarding upon departure, we've implemented that enhanced entry process known as simplified arrival. And right now, and it's changing as we speak because we're rolling it out this week in 2 more locations, but 18 airports encompassing a total of 20 terminals, which includes 4 pre-clearance locations. But it's the first step in reimagining how travelers arrive into the United States. And when arriving at select airports during international travel, passengers will now pause for a photo at the CBP primary inspection area. And in a matter of seconds, CBP's biometric facial comparison service will automatically compare the traveler's new photo to the images that the traveler has already provided to the government, such as passport and visa photos. And with the enhanced simplified arrival process, foreign travelers will confirm their identity through the photo match and no longer need to provide fingerprints if they're returned travelers. And we combine the top performing NEC3 algorithm with highly trained CBP officers who are skilled at verifying the authenticity of travel documents to ensure the highest possible accuracy. Biometrics have proven to be an effective tool to combat the use of stolen and fraudulent documents, excuse me, in our environment. And to date, we've processed more than 55 million travelers through facial biometrics and captured almost 300 imposters. So overall, the use of facial biometrics provides travelers with a more secure, hygienic, touchless process that modernizes air travel. But as new technology is deployed, there are certainly legitimate questions about misuse and privacy. But I want to say that, CBP, we're steadfastly committed to travelers' privacy, and we take our obligations and responsibilities very seriously. So CBP uses biometric facial comparison technology only at specific times and locations where travelers are already required to present proof of identity. And we incorporate 4 primary safeguards to secure passenger data, including secure data encryption, irreversible biometric templates, secure storage, and only a brief retention period for US citizens, which is less than 12 hours. And travelers' photos are transmitted and used for identity verification purposes only. So travelers who do not wish to participate in the facial biometric process simply notify a CBP officer, request a manual document check, and are processed consistent with existing requirements for entry to the United States. We notify travelers about the opt-out process through tear sheets, gate announcements, and signage. Additionally, DHS and CBP have published over 10 privacy impact assessments on the biometric entry-exit program that can be found on the DHS website. And we enroll the majority of foreign travelers into the DHS Biometric Identity Management System as a biometric confirmation of entry or departure and retain those photos for up to 75 years. But we've met with representatives from privacy advocacy groups several times, and we have been very transparent about our biometrics program and why we appreciate the opportunity to speak to it today. We welcome the open dialogue to ensure that there is a clear understanding of how CBP protects the privacy of all travelers. We've also enhanced our entry-exit website, biometrics.cbp.gov, by adding additional resources and information, such as the locations with the facial biometric process, privacy notices, as well as news announcements. So despite the setbacks from COVID-19, we want to continue to work with our air travel partners to help rebuild the public's confidence in our travel system. And specifically, we're going to continue to test technology and deploy our biometric entry and exit operations, working with all of our partners, the airlines, the airports, TSA, and the biometrics and technology industries to maximize the benefits of facial biometrics throughout the entire travel journey. Before the pandemic, CBP realized the significant value of our partnerships with a variety of stakeholders in travel and tourism, air travel, cruise travel, non-governmental organizations, academia, our international partners, and the biometrics and technology industries. And it's due to these strong partnerships that we've been able to implement so many successful biometric deployments in our air operations. And while we've all faced enormous challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic, including unfortunately unexpected funding shortfalls, there remain tremendous opportunities to test innovative technologies and reimagine the future of touchless travel while we have this slowdown. So in the coming months into 2021, we're going to continue to expand Simplified Arrival to all of the major airports. And we will also be supporting our air travel partners' efforts to expand biometric exit. Global Entry, our CBP signature trusted traveler program, which has over 7 million travelers enrolled, has now been upgraded also with facial biometrics at 19 airports as part of the first phase of innovation for our Global Entry members. And CBP and TSA will continue to advance the biometrics collaboration we've built these past few years. After several successful pilots, CBP and TSA are exploring data sharing and integration between biometric and traveler vetting systems. And the goal will be to create a consolidated traveler identity verification process that meets the needs of both our agencies. And it'll get us that one step closer to the touchless end-to-end facial biometric journey. We will look to our industry partners certainly to develop new solutions to deal with the future challenges. For example, developing algorithms that can accurately verify identity when a traveler wears a face mask. So again, thank you, Daniel and FTE, and for the opportunity to participate in the Biometrics Summit today, to really highlight our ongoing efforts and innovate travel and support the travel recovery efforts. I look forward to the continued engagement in these ongoing discussions around technology innovation and privacy issues. And also thank you to my fellow panelists, who I look forward to the discussion today. It's certainly going to take all of us working together to ensure that the public understands the benefits of the technology when used responsibly, as both CBP and TSA have demonstrated with our travel and biometric industry partners. I'm proud of what we've accomplished together, and despite the devastating impacts of this pandemic, it's not affected our desire to implement our vision of a secure, seamless travel journey. In fact, it's reinforced our belief that CBP's own entry-exit mission can support the resumption of travel and serve as a model for transformation efforts. So with that, thank you. I'll turn it back and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was a fantastic way to kick off and a lot of great food for thought there. And we'll come back to you a little bit later for follow-up questions. So we're going to move swiftly on now and have a fireside chat with Christian Drager, the VP of Customer Experience at Star Alliance, and Rafi Berikim, the Senior Vice President and Chief Experience Officer at NEC Corporation of America, about how they've been working together to leverage biometrics to support Star's frequent flyers going forward. Gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a life-changing event in the daily life for all of us, the likes of which we've perhaps not seen since September the 11th in 2001. And there's a growing consensus that many of these changes are here to stay. How has this new normal affected the aviation industry and in particular your business strategies?
Well, Daniel, I think you hit it on the spot when you said that this is unprecedented. Obviously, we're all still struggling with the COVID-19 impact. And hopefully with some of the encouraging news that we're getting lately, we will see a recovery soon. Some of the takeaways that we have from a business perspective is that there are a few factors. One of them is that we really feel that some of the health and safety measures that we're taking right now to create confidence in the industry, some of them will disappear, but I think from a general consensus, we see that health and safety measures will play a role in the future, and we need to be able to address that. We're seeing also that we see a shift in how our airlines, and we see it especially with our members, their customer segmentation is changing. There is an anticipation that we will have different customer groups. Maybe the business segment will decrease, maybe the leisure part will increase. We're also seeing smaller networks. But we also actually have some positive impacts from the crisis. One of them is that we're seeing airlines becoming more efficient as they go through their cost-cutting measures and trying to rethink on how they operate. And some of those efficiencies will surely go into the future. And last but not least, and that really ties it into our biometric initiative, we look at the digital transformation agenda, which we feel is really being accelerated. We're seeing as recovery, we saw first signs of recovery in the summer. We're seeing some in certain regions, and wherever we see that digital topics, digital transformation is high on the agenda. These are things like contact tracing, the health wallet will be a top issue currently in the industry, and biometrics as well. It's amazing how much interest has been retained despite the current crisis for the biometric topic. I think the touchlessness is one contributing factor here. So that's a little bit the take on the crisis and the impact it has on our business from an.
Thanks. And Rafi, what about you?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and a pleasure to be with the panel today and Danielle. I think for long, NEC has been working on touchless and travel, particularly with our partnership with CBP, and a pleasure to actually put a e-meet you, DEAC, Diana Sabatino as well. So we've been working on touchless technologies for a while, and sometimes unfortunately, you look for, bad events turns into compelling events, and this pandemic really brought into forefront the need for a touchless technologies, something that people, I think, were used to the convenient and the secure part of it, but now with the health part of it provides yet another aspect to why the technology could be now well understood and I guess, put in use. So it has brought some additional challenges for us. I think DEAC, or Assistant Commissioner Sabatino, talked about COVID and masks. Obviously, we've worked diligently with the Star Alliance as we launched their program to work with masks. We've been successfully tested that, and we're prepared to actually launch that program with masks in our initial launch. So we appreciate, again, the partnership that we have with the Star Alliance as well. And I think as we talk through this panel, I hope we get an opportunity to talk about our future vision of what the biometrics would mean throughout the entire travel journey. But for now, I think the pandemic has brought a compelling event, brought biometrics and touchless technologies into the forefront. And I really think for some of us that we've really believed in it, really provided us yet another rationale to why our belief is correct and we should continue to pursue this mission that we've all had for a while.
Yeah, I totally agree. Never waste a crisis, right? And I think there's no doubt we see it around the world. The digital transformation efforts have just been accelerated in every organization we talk to, and it needed to happen. And this is definitely, I think, one of the positives we'll take from COVID, that this is really going to accelerate things that needed to happen. Christian, I mean, in spite of these unprecedented events and challenges, Star Alliance has managed to launch this planned biometric service in earnest. So what does the Star Alliance biometrics experience look like exactly?
Well, that's an interesting question, because when we started looking at biometrics, we saw a very unconsolidated landscape of solutions, a lot of them that were isolated to certain airports or certain regions, certain airlines, but we didn't really see the ability for a customer to have a global experience. And that is one of the aspirations that we had, that our solution provides a global applicability. We wanted it, of course, also to be touchless. So how does it actually work? The first step is very simple, and we actually have a slogan around it, which is called enroll once into the program and use it multiple times. So we actually want to have a customer go through the efforts of enrolling into the program, and that's fairly easy. It's a mobile experience. The customer basically takes a selfie, takes a scan of his document. The selfie is matched with a picture on the document is authenticated. And once that is done, the customer is almost finished, because then his facial image will be stored, encrypted in an encrypted manner. The customer also has the ability in this process to provide consent. So he can say he wants his biometric or his facial template to be used only in certain regions or with certain airlines. And this is then stored with the frequent flyer number, which is the unique identifier of the customer. And it is currently being stored then in a database. In the future, we're also envisioning that this can be stored on the customer's personal device, so that there will be a decentralized storage. And once the customer has done this, this is basically it. The customer then can simply go through airport environments that are enabled and go through the various touch points, whether we're starting off with 4, which is the backdrop, it's the security gate, it's the lounge access, and it's the departure gate. Those are our aspirations. And now a customer simply needs to go to these touch points. He will just look into the camera, and then this image taken at the touch point is then compared to the image that was in the database. And if those images match, the customer can proceed to the touch point. Once again, of course, there is a lot of orchestration going on in the background to enable this. That is actually the magic that we have provided. But from a customer's experience, it's really this enroll once, use multiple times in a very simplified manner. I want to maybe highlight one additional topic, which is important for this solution to actually become global, and that is interoperability. In order for us to scale this, we need to be able to feed our identities into different orchestration layers and vice versa. We foresee in the future there will not be just one player. There will be a number of players, and they need to work together and collaborate.
Very good. Rafi, I mean, NEC is driving much of the identity-driven automation and innovation taking place in the market. Can you talk about some of NEC's key technologies that support this Star Alliance biometric service?
No, I'll be glad to. Well, I think one of the things NEC has been able to provide is our global large-scale successes. And I think that on behalf of the team, I'm really proud of obviously the partnership we've had with CBP, with Delta Airlines, with Star Alliance. We also are proud to have also now be supporting the Port of Seattle in their biometric exit implementation as well. So I think one of the advantages that we bring is that our team is capable of providing a large scale, really game-changing implementations. And we're not necessarily in one airport or in one terminal, but our aim has been to provide a platform and a capabilities to actually provide a game changers. And some of the partnerships that we've announced, in addition to the ones I've already mentioned, like with CETA and others, point to that direction of scalability. Obviously, so we have the technology. I'm so proud of the team that we have, the dedicated members of the team that actually have been successfully implemented these programs. And I think when you look at the Star Alliance, we really did something that perhaps is new in the technology. For the first time, we have a biometrics enrollment app that you can download from an app store, from Google Store or Apple Store. The amount of testing and the amount of requirements gathering and functionality that we went through to be able to provide, validate a passport or a driver's license, take the capture, store that, and go through the entire security, privacy partnership that we've had with Star, Lufthansa, Frankfurt and airports and others. Those are some of the technologies. And of course, I think everybody is aware of our core facial recognition technology, which we continue to improve. So in overall, I think NEC is all about technology, the people and partnership. And we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, to make something work across the Star Alliance family, right? That's a big task, right? That must have had its challenges.
And not that pandemic made it any easier, but thank God. Yeah, I think we had very good partners all across, very good partners, good team. So yeah, very proud of that.
Fantastic. And to both of you, I mean, what are some of the key barriers to widespread adoption of more biometric implementation at airports, do you think? Christian,
I think
yes,
you go first.
I think it starts off with a very practical sentiment, and that is funding. I think right now airlines have and also other players like airports have reverted back to cash management, to watching their liquidity. That is at the forefront of considerations right now. So I think we need to come back to a certain level of recovery that allows basically all of these stakeholders to basically unleash their investment agendas. We do have indications that once this happens, we're going to be very high on the list of topics that they are ready to invest in. So we're confident. I think another area that we see as a barrier is what I've mentioned before, interoperability and standards. So we need to have common standards here. I think IATA needs to play a role, other players need to play a role, so that standards provide us with the ability to really interoperate and scale the service. And then I think the legal framework is another barrier that will be different from country to country. We've seen in our project right now that if you're very proactive with the agencies and the regulators, they actually support you. And I think we can build on that. And last but not least, we need to get the trust of the customer. So I think before the crisis, customers were a little bit more reluctant to give up their biometric identity. We've had a survey, and we now have over 75% of customers telling us if you can demonstrate that you really create a better service, a better experience, we're ready to give you our biometric identity for you to enable this. So these are some of the barriers that I'm seeing, but I'm sure, Rafi, you also have some takeaways.
No, thank you. I think you've mentioned all the ones I was going to say, particularly about interoperability and standards. Definitely agree with those. Perhaps the only other two that I would add is one, I think there's something to be said about education. And I know all of us, I think, have really a responsibility to continue to educate, because there are continuous forces about, like, for example, what about my privacy? What is this used for? How long is it stored? I think those are the things that we can work with the legislative branches of our government and continue to educate the passengers. So I see that as one of the barriers that we need to overcome through that means. The second one, I think, is the networking effect. I think as we scale these, as people can see it in multiple airports and multiple gates, the more of this networking effect comes in, I think that would also lead to higher other airports and airlines and passengers actually demanding it. So I'm looking forward to scaling the projects that we've done with STAR and others, and I think Christian is as well. So I think the crossing the chasm, right? I think we now need, it's proven, it works. People, I think, are attracted to it. It saves money, it's efficient, it's secure. So I think with a little bit more scalability and increase in networking effect of it, we will see a greater impact as well.
Yeah, and just a follow-up question, Christian. I mean, you talked about the 4 points, of capture, the backdrop, security, lounge, and departure. So I guess at every airport, that there might be different players involved in getting biometrics into those 4 points. So is it a case of that every single location you're having to deal with lots of different people to get that to happen? I mean, that's quite a massive task in itself, I imagine.
Well, it is, but it's surprising if you start looking at that. The first 2 airports where we looked at the different touchpoint providers, we afterwards found out that most of them provide at least another 10, 15 airports. They provide their services. So we're probably not going to be able to have sort of like 1 or 2 providers that cover all touchpoints throughout the globe. But we do see that there are clusters, so that is helpful. And we're also seeing that there are other parts of the solution where you need to include feeds, for example, from a reservation system, and then you might be talking to Sabre, or you might be talking to Amadeus. So I think if you look at it from that angle, there is a lot of opportunity to consolidate and to get sort of like this interoperability going.
Yeah, understood. Okay, and maybe sort of close off here. What is your vision for the future of the STAR Alliance Biometrics program, gentlemen? Christian, maybe you can kick us off there. I'm interested to see where you think this heads.
Well, I think we mentioned it before that it's all about scaling the service, and I think that really relates back to the customer. A customer that enrolls into our program today, and then in 2 years down the road, he can use it at the odd location somewhere. they will just sign off and they will not continue with that experience. So we really need to scale. I said it before, 650 million customers. That is our addressable market. We're starting with the FFP, the frequent flyers, but eventually we want to hit those 650 million. We have 1,300 airports. That is really where we want to scale. Another topic strategically is we want to remain best of class in terms of our service itself. That's why we're also partnering with NEC. We need to be able to see how the dynamics are. I mentioned it before, decentralized storage on a customer's mobile device might be another way to go. We saw the amazing work that NEC did on short notice to develop the face mask algorithm. And we will have similar situations in the future, and that's where we want to have the best of class. Those are, I think, really our short-term aspirations, the strategic aspirations, and long-term, we really want to look at expanding it to the whole travel ecosystem. So, why shouldn't a customer use it when he rides a train to the airport? Why shouldn't he use it when he actually checks in at the queue of the car rental agency? Why can't he just go to the car? The same with hotels. So duty free, some of these might come at a later stage. Some of them we might already integrate in the coming months. So I think this expansion to the travel ecosystem, that's our aspiration. And then last but not least, we also think that there are more use cases for biometrics. So you can combine it with face pay or other aspects of how a customer interacts in his normal walk of life, so to say. And that is, I think, from a general perspective, where we see our Star Alliance biometric initiative going.
Very good. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. And Rafi, can you comment on that as well, please?
No, I think Christian should actually join our team, because I think that actually is well aligned with what I was going to say as well. So, and perhaps it's because of the close relationship we have with him. So, yeah, obviously, I think we talked about the networking effect, and I think scalability is key to us, right? We would like to see a greater number of airports and airlines taking advantage of the technology. In the long run, I 100% agree with Christian, because we would like to have our platform, our ID Lite, to be the trusted use of identity verification, not only in the aviation, but also throughout the life choices and the experiences of the passengers. So we're working on facial pay, we're working on access control, we're working on our partnerships with, it's too early to say, but other key partnerships that would actually bring a convenience into retail, into advertising, into credit card payments. So there's a lot of really a runway for us to run to using our platform. But again, it all relies on us continuing to be able to be the trusted provider, the one that has security, privacy, technology, and that digital transformation in mind for all of our clients. It's a huge part of our platform. It's a huge part of our technology and our roadmap, and we'll look forward to working with Christian and others to bring that to market, please.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you, gentlemen. That was really, really insightful. So let's head over to Seattle now to hear from a longtime friend of mine, Dave Wilson, the Director of Airport Innovation at the Port of Seattle. So he's going to tell us about the way that they're using technology and taking a unique approach, particularly around the policy to biometrics at SeaTac. So Dave, our audience is yours. I understand you're going to share a deck with us, so please feel free to take control.
Hey, great. Thank you, Daniel. Once again, I appreciate you being here. And yes, I've enjoyed being at FTE many times as both a participant or conference attendee as well as a speaker. And I really appreciate the panel I'm on as well. We're all partners basically in aviation. It's really great. So I have a couple of slides talking about policy and strategy. Requires, I thought, a little bit of visual to really see what we're doing at SeaTac to implement biometrics. And can you see my slides?
Certainly can.
Okay, great. So for background, the Port of Seattle owns and operates the Fisherman's Terminal, which is the home port for the Alaska fishing fleet. We have also 2 cruise terminals, which are serve international travelers, which CBP also operates in a cruise facility. We have grain terminals. We also operate cargo with the Seaport Alliance with Tacoma. And also the Port of Seattle also operates and owns the SeaTac International Airport, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Last year, things are different this year, but last year we had almost 52 million passengers passing through Seattle. We have 30 airline partners, 91 nonstop domestic, and also 27 international destinations from SeaTac. And we're owned and operated and managed by elected officials, 5 elected officials in our commission. And this was what typically our international arrivals facility looked like in 2019. Any kind of weather condition, you would see actually, unfortunately, hold on boards. In other words, you've just flown 9 hours from Asia, you get to SeaTac and you're stuck on the plane for 30 minutes because there's so many passengers going through this facility. So our plan was, how do we work with that? Working with CBP, we actually embarked on building a new international arrivals facility, which will be opening up early next year. A key part of this one is a larger facility, but also it's key is it will be implementing the simplified arrival, which would ideally process passengers much faster. So we're looking for the efficiencies of biometrics on entry as well. But to do that, also the Port of Seattle Commission also had some concerns about biometric technology. We've been using biometrics for employees and tenants at the airport for over a decade, looking at fingerprints for doing access control, for example. So we're very familiar with biometrics, but we hadn't used biometrics for public-facing operations at SeaTac. So in December of last year, the commission adopted principles for doing public-facing biometrics. It wasn't limited to facial, also it covered iris, fingerprints, different kinds of things, but basically how do we implement biometrics in a public-facing environment? They established a working group whose task was taking the principles and coming up with policy recommendations, and actually how do you implement biometrics in a way that complies with the principles. Want to give commendations to Eric Schenfeld and Veronica Valdez, who really drove this work to come up with the policies. We also had an external advisory group. It was made up of a very diverse group with different perspectives on biometrics. And it was airline participation, Customs and Border Protection participated, TSA. We had lots of privacy groups, and they were to provide feedback on recommendations because it's a very wide-ranging perspective on the use of biometrics, particularly biometric facial recognition. We also had a special biometrics committee to oversee these efforts. That was 2 of our commissioners. And at that time, they put on hold expanded uses of biometrics at all port facilities until we come up with these new policies. And essentially, the principles they came up with were that the use of biometrics has to be justified in the sense that there should be a clear reason why you're doing the biometrics. There should be some reason, and it shouldn't be for surveillance for large groups of people for law enforcement. It needs to have private data. We just talked about that, some of the panelists, and how do you protect the data? That's important because biometrics is probably the most important personal identification information you can have is the PII. So how do you protect it? Equitable. There's really a concern in the public that the information, the use of the technology isn't equitable with basically it has ethnic or gender bias. So that we want to ensure that it's equitable. And that's basically is the algorithms used to do the comparisons. It should be transparent too. The passengers need to know that actually we're using biometrics. So it's a key part is being transparent in how it's being used. It should be lawful. And the things we're doing with biometrics with the Customs Border Protection, basically it complies with federal law and state law. It should be ethical. Really is how do we handle the data? And finally, there's the key part is it should be voluntary. We talked about opting into it. Well, that's a key part of the principles. Do you need to opt in or opt out of the process? And those are the guiding principles. So behind that, the working groups came up with some use cases for this because we found out one, it wasn't a simple one simple policy to cover all the different kinds of use cases. So we broke them up into 5. The first one is biometric air exit, which is a policy which has been submitted and approved by the commission. The second is how to use it for law enforcement. And there's a moratorium using biometric facial recognition for law enforcement at the Port of Seattle. There's also the 3 and 4 really are how do you use biometrics? We just talked about that, where how do you use biometrics in all the other process, unattended bag drop perhaps, or TSA, or checking into the system. So how would you use biometrics for traveler functions? And the distinction between private and government, if you were to use TVS, the traveler verification system, That's number 4, biometrics using government system to do the authentication. If you're using a private system, much like Clear, where someone logs into or opts into a biometric system and the gallery of photos is maintained by a private company, that's a different set of policies. And the last one is really biometric for air and cruise entry, which we're doing in our cruise facility and also with our international arrivals facility. So the external advisory group reviewed all the policies, and the external advisory group was really to provide feedback on the policies. They weren't really to approve the policies, but they were simply to provide feedback, and they really helped form much of the policies. And the biometric special committee is reviewing those, and we're looking for a complete vote on those policies. So how does it work? Well, the first one we did was, this has been approved, the biometric air exit, which we're doing. The commission approved the project to implement biometric air exit using Customs Border Protection's TVS system and the NEC camera system at 30 gates at SeaTac Airport. In 2019, we were on a pilot project. It's one of my key points too about implementing biometrics. We did a pilot project early on to find out what we could learn about the process. Did passengers like the process? Did the air, how well do the air carriers implement it? What are some of the pitfalls potentially of using it? So we ran a pilot project, was very successful. And the recommendations were reviewed by the committee in February. They approved the commission. The commission approved biometric air exit for the in March, and we developed a policy called EX22, which is a port policy for implementing and managing biometric air exit at SeaTac. So how do you apply those principles to biometric air exit, which is what we have more knowledge of? One, it's justified because it's a standard Customs Border Protection process, and it automates the air exit process. It's private because CBP has very extensive privacy policies, and the airlines and the airports must follow those privacy policies. It's equitable because the TVS system algorithm was rated the highest by the National Institute of Standards and Technology for accuracy. And we can also set training standards. So even though the equipment works properly and the TVS system works properly, but if the people using it aren't trained in how to use it properly, that basically defeats the purpose. It's also very transparent. CBP has has messaging requirements, and we can also enhance those the messaging throughout the airport, the process for our passengers. It has to be lawful. Certainly Congress has mandated it, and we're looking at following all state and federal laws. It's ethical, so we can make sure that it works with our very diverse population in King County and also our travelers. And voluntary, so you can opt out of it if you want to. The fallback is to use the standard process we're using today. So it certainly complied with all of those policies, recommendations for that. Just jump into some nitty gritty details. How do you make sure that you really follow this properly? Well, one of the things you want to verify is that there's no unintended consequences for unintended image capture. So if someone wants to opt out, you have to make sure that you don't capture their image if they so choose to opt out. We're also going to be auditing our airline partners to make sure they're following both CBP policy as well as port policy. We also comply with what the CBP requires on making sure that we're complying and our system works properly as required. We're looking at training standards. We'll be training our airline representatives. We're doing some computer-based training, which we'll talk a little bit about that. We have an extensive communication plan, which is to be approved by Customs Border Protection. We're doing an annual accountability report, make that available to the public. We'll be forming a technical ethics advisory board, which is looking at the technology for lots of different parts of the process, all the 5 different policies. It's kind of an eye chart with all the information. The second one really is, we're looking at how do you implement this? Well, on the right-hand side, I'll go right to left, we've come up with additional signage that augments the required by Customs Border Protection. We're doing terminal voice-wide paging systems to make passengers aware of the process, make it very clear what the process is. We're developing computer-based training on how we'll train our airline staff to do proper use of TVS and the NEC system to do biometric air exit. We're using a tool to do auditing to help us make sure that things are followed properly and correctly, and being able to report on the activities at each gate and success rates and things like that. That kind of wraps up the presentation I had. I will stop sharing now, but that's the background of the policy we're doing. As I said, we'll plan on having our first gate in operation with biometric air exit using NEC's product in December. And our goal is to have all 30 gates implemented by the end of Q1 in 2021. And then we'll also be celebrating our opening of the IF project also with simplified arrival. So that's kind of where we are with how to implement the policies that conform to the requirements an operator of biometric facial recognition.
Fantastic, Dave. Lots of great detail there. And just to reiterate, because it's something that I think you touched on there, but it might not be as clear to the audience as I know it is. Like, your signage approach to this is really gone the extra mile, hasn't it? People can be under no illusions that what is happening. And I think that's really important that passengers really understand that. Maybe elaborate on that a little bit more, because I think you've really gone far further than anywhere else that I know of that's rolled out a biometric program.
So we're working with our external relations folks. So we start off with, you begin with information provided on our website and with reports and what the process is. We'll have signage at the ticket counters of all the international departure gates showing what the process is and the fact that's going to be used. We're using terminal voice wide paging. We're looking at 7 different languages as well, not just English, because it's international departures. So we have different languages on what the process is. They'll be able to, if they want to opt out, they'll go to the customer service agent to get information how they can opt out of the process. But we'll have CBP signage required at the counter as well. But we're definitely looking at different types of signage to make it really visible what the process is, make people understand. And the fact, there's recognition is a touchless process. And in today's environment, touchless is really good because we don't want to have the exchange of documents and minimize that as much as possible. We're also looking at 1-step versus 2-step process. The ideal goal is having each of our carriers, you simply walk up to the boarding gate, they take your picture, welcome aboard the flight, as opposed to then scanning your boarding pass. So we're looking at both the 1-step and 2-step process. We trialed that during our pilot project. We definitely want to do the 1-step process, which is really the goal of biometrics. I think facial is simplify the process, let identity be part of the process, which means, okay, if you're at a boarding gate, you want to board. If you're at a kiosk, maybe your facial recognition says, print my bag tag, something like that.
Yeah, very good. And I think a few of you have talked about that point of trust of customers. And I think it's so important that we're really transparent and open with the audience and the customers about what is happening. And I think if we really want to build that trust, we've got to be very forthright with what is happening and give them that opt-out option. So I really applaud the approach you've taken there in Seattle, Dave. So thank you for that presentation. Again, fantastic content and detail, and that now enables us to sort of talk collectively about what you're all doing and identify some of the challenges and opportunities. And perhaps what a nice one might be is say all of you have been involved in rolling out these biometric initiatives, and you've got some real valuable experience, and we know that there's a lot of airlines and airports out there right now looking at rolling out biometrics. So could you each tell us, like, what are your key learnings and what advice could you offer to other airports and airlines around the world looking at rolling out a biometric program? Maybe Diane, would you like to kick us off with that?
Sure. I think my first lesson learned from the panel is to have Dave participate in all my future events. And as well as my other colleagues on the call. Really important lesson learned for us. The most key piece of this is the public trust in what we're doing and that we're using it responsibly. We cannot do it by ourselves in messaging that, and our public-private partnerships in rolling out a program as comprehensive as this and as refined as this just would not be possible without key stakeholders. And certainly our investments in the engagement with the air travel industry, the biometric industry, is what's going to carry the day for us when our story is told, not just by CBP and the privacy impact state, assessments that we're doing, but also by all of the partners that are involved in this process with us. And I know CBP, frankly, was a small part of the overall end-to-end travel process, but part of the solution, frankly, in the travel recovery efforts. So I think the lesson learned, again, that the importance of those partnerships.
Yeah, absolutely. Christian, as say you've given yourself a big project there rolling out across Star Alliance. You must have some good learnings and advice for our audience.
Yeah, I think some of them were already touched upon by Diane around, security, privacy by design and topics like that. So maybe I can just highlight 2 others. One of them would be stakeholder commitment. We have really seen that when we developed the solution, we needed to bring airports, we needed to bring airlines, and we needed to bring regulators and a lot of different parties to the table. And we've especially seen that if you look at it from an airport vantage point, if you have the combination of the airport and a home carrier or somebody that has a relevance at this airport, it really makes things a lot easier because there's a lot of effort involved here to make this work. So the stakeholder commitment was crucial. The second part, which I want to also mention, it's a little bit uncharted territory, is commercials. Obviously, some of the solutions that CBP is providing is part of a, once again, regulatory process. But if we look at some of the things that we want to provide to the different touch points, somebody needs to fund it, somebody needs to pay for it. And that is something where I think we're slowly gaining our first experience, but you don't have a very established market in this area.
Understood. And Rafi, what about your tips for those thinking about doing this?
Sorry about that. I think from a technology provider, what we look forward the most is the what if type of questions from our partners. I think if you look back in 2015, 2016, when we were working with CBP, it was a two-step process. And then somebody asked, well, what if it's a one-step process? And can we not go with that? Later on, we worked with Delta Airlines. They asked, what if, for example, we bring it to multiple touch points, and we work with TSA, and we ran a pilot in Terminal F, for example, where it actually took us from the entire beginning to the curb to gate is what we called it. As if, for example, with CBP, we're at the gate. And then with Delta, we extended it to one terminal, the entire curb to gate. Then we had the opportunity to work with Star and Christian, and we went through one airline to multiple airlines. So I think from a technology provider, we welcome the feedback. We welcome the challenges. We welcome the what ifs. Because if we know those things, not only us, but other providers in this technology, I think together we can overcome those solutions. So to me, the partnership means put the challenges out there, right? Let us know them, let us tackle them. And I think overall, I think the industry will win. And that, I think that's what we all want. So we welcome the what if questions. I think from my point of view, I think we like to know what is it that we can do that make our lives better. So that's what I recommend. Ask the provider what if, and see what happens. I think most often you'll see that through collaboration, most of those issues are solved.
Very good, very good. And Dave, your experiences, I know you're always very good at providing insights to your peers and tips and advice. So I'm interested to hear what you would like to pass on here.
So a couple of things. I think it's really, we touched on it a lot already, but it's about partnerships, working with the CBP, our airline partners, NECs, our solution providers. You have to have a great relationship with them to make it successful. For example, we developed an extensive communication plan, shared with CBP, got immediate response back that the plan was great. Let's move forward with it, things like that. I think key with the airlines too is making them aware of what the process is, keeping them engaged, communicate regularly. I think also showing the merits of this. In other words, I think, can't belabor the point, but the one-step process is the kind of the goal to make it simplified. It's really obvious to us. I can't help but not talk about our Fly Healthy It's SCA program, because the COVID has introduced enormous challenges for airports and airlines and everyone basically. But example of how this technology can really help. We put up sneeze guards everywhere. I think everyone has seen the plexiglass shields everywhere. Well, this actually technology it works in conjunction with that. In other words, the airline operator screen is on one side, the passenger screen is on the other, and there's no exchange of even any breath at all, possibly, because the system actually facilitates the use of its sneeze guard to limit COVID spread, basically, while you're in the boarding process. So having that one-step process, two-step is really key, and making that aware to the passenger, the traveling public, that this actually is a COVID response as well, where it minimizes that exchange of COVID.
Very good, very good. And going back to the funding point, this is a bit of a tough question, but I mean, what are the mechanisms and the models by which it should be funded, right? Let's say this is a really tough time for anyone to find some investment. Is this something the airlines should be driving? Is it something the airports? I mean, is it different in every location? But is there some kind of model that we see as being the right one in terms of driving that discussion forward on how that happens? Because obviously, until there's perhaps a formalized funding model, we won't see this rolling out as fast as perhaps it could. Does anyone want to take that one? It's a tough one.
Maybe I can just say that the airports should pay for it. So maybe that's a bit too far, but I firmly believe that it's not one single stakeholder that is involved here. So if you look at what biometrics processing and seamless experience does, I think it provides more efficiency. It provides this touchless experience. It provides also more secure experience, and all of this generates benefits for different parties. So an airport has the benefit of customers having a higher disposition to go spend money in a duty-free shop. The airline has a more efficient operation. So I think we will need to see how some of these players come together to fund this initially. But we also, I think, should keep an eye on the customer himself or herself, because if we're able to provide biometrics with add-on value, we can actually ask customers to also participate in funding. And if we're able to go down that road, I think it becomes quite interesting.
Very interesting. And Dave, do you want to counter Christian's comment there?
Well, I agree. No, I will not at this point. But I think that going back to our use cases, the funding basically is what use case you're talking about. If it's a company like Clear or an airline wants to implement some special biometric process independent of the airport, that's basically they'll have to fund that activity. It's based on the use case. For biometric air exit, biometric simplified arrival, that's immigration process, and there's federal law regulating that. So if you want to be an international airport, you basically are funding that kind of effort.
Diane and Rafi, do you have anything to add to this question?
No, I think I agree with what the panel has said. I think it depends on the use case, right? I think if you're looking at immigration and border control, obviously we see government kind of investing in that. We have a relationship with Seattle, Port of Seattle, Delta, Star. So we've seen it kind of being funded from all over the place. But I can tell you from an RFP and a kind of a next 6 to 12 months, more than ever, I've seen a number of airports issuing out a request for proposals for such implementations. We saw it in Sydney. We're seeing it now in Changi in Singapore. Activities going on in the Middle East. Europe is kind of slow at the time, obviously because of the COVID. But overall, I think we're seeing the airports taking the initiative at this point. So whether that is a trend of things to come, I don't know. In the past, I would say in the last 2 years, I saw more airlines kind of specifically for example, their own terminal. But the trend nowadays, at least from the activities and requests for proposals, comes from the airports.
Although it's interesting, one of the most interesting use cases I'm seeing, and I'd recommend anyone to have a look into it, is what AirAsia are doing. They were very much putting biometrics at the heart of all their digital transformation efforts and using it through the different businesses they have in retail and other things. So I think there's some very interesting use cases which could be leveraged, and so I think it's a technology that could be used in many different ways, and I think we're just starting to get going into the lengths in which we'll see it utilized, which is very exciting. And perhaps that leads us on nicely to the next question, which Christian and Rafi touched upon earlier, is that obviously we've talked for a while that the possibilities of biometrics are about looking through the end-to-end journey, and not just at the airport, but perhaps cruise and car rental and hotels and things like that. And perhaps we haven't seen too much of that actually happening yet. What do we need to do to accelerate that? Because I think that's when it gets really interesting for passengers, particularly as well, that it can be used as a token, through multiple different ways of life. Could you touch on that maybe a little bit more, Christian and Rafi? You hinted at a few interesting things going on in the background. Can I push you for a bit more?
Well, I'll go first. I would say that within the next 12 months, we will see a greater number of those touch points coming into play. It may not be like the visible ones, but I would see there's a lot will be done in regards to access control, using facial recognition with regards to access control. And then I think the formation that I see is that, there's a lot of information about us on the cyber world, about our profiles, when we go on Google and Facebook and others. But there's really but if we marry that, and I think this is the potential that I think NEC sees, that if we can marry that through a consent driven, for which, for example, the client says, I am now consenting for you to know my information and provide me with that. I think once those two worlds can come together, for example, like the profiles of my likes and dislikes and the websites that I visit and the purchases that I make, and the sites that I go versus a physical world where the individual has provided consent, that we can marry the physical world with the cyber world. That where I think is that you will see a future growth of those, and we're working on that. It requires partnership. It requires a few proof of concepts trials that we're in the midst of performing as well. So it will come. I think we all know it will come. Now, where it will come, would we see it in, like, for example, in duty free, or will we see it in like a rental car? I think that's yet to be determined. But the opportunities could be like who really kind of comes up with a trial first. So we're looking forward to it.
Very good. Christian, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just one point. I think some of the pressure we talked about before, bringing it to the whole travel ecosystem, but actually we will probably get some pressure from outside of the travel ecosystem, because if we see adoption in other walks of life, if I can use biometrics in my medical experience, if I can use it in my banking experience, in for my financial services experience, well, then if I come to the airport and I travel, I take it as a given that I have this experience. So we will see these outside pressures moving us, and you know, I think it's better if we proactively move instead of being pushed around.
And Diane, you obviously spent a lot of time in Miami. We started to see some exciting things happening with the cruise operators down there to create an end-to-end journey. Can maybe you can give us a little bit more insight into that sort of true potential of this technology?
And we're very excited about the rollout in the cruise passenger environment, and again, another location where we really think part of that overall solution. So we do have partnerships with a number of the cruise lines, still working through with some, but you know, South Florida has really kind of been our ground zero for rolling that out, but we will be seeing that TBS implementation of the facial biometric in other locations, potentially up in Newark, Galveston, looking at Long Beach, even up in Seattle fairly soon. But we haven't stopped working with the cruise industry during the pandemic. They've been very active and very motivated, frankly, because this offers them that true touchless disembark piece. That's you know, at the end of the day, the safest, healthiest one for them, but also increases the security measures that you know, we're focused on as well.
Yeah, exciting stuff. And Dave, do you have any comments about this? Obviously, a lot of going on in Seattle. Certain major technology companies pushing some of this stuff, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see the public grow more, and maybe enamored is too strong a word, but I have an iPhone. I use facial recognition to log into my phone. My wife has Windows 10. You log into that by looking at it. So facial recognition is seen. I think what the public has to have is two things. One, and Raphael talked, an opt-in. I want to be able to opt into some of these processes that are optional, not mandatory requirements, because you're also building that gallery of photos. If it's facial, how do you get the gallery of photos? That's one of the stumbling blocks. People have to, you know, build it. If it's a private database, that's a more challenging problem. But so I think you have to show the value of what you're getting to the public, as well as give them the process. I mean, the privacy groups tell us how to do it. Opting in, don't sell my data, let me opt out when I want to. There's some really basic things that are part of most privacy stuff, but I think it's going to adapt. It will be widely adopted if we show the value to the traveling public, or just the public period.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there is some traction as well. I understand that there's trials going on in the new Beijing airport in the duty-free stores using biometrics. And I think it's public knowledge that Hertz are exploring this right now as well. So I think we've got some encouraging signs on that front. So maybe a good question for everybody is, obviously there were some important points. Christian talked about interoperability, standards, harmonization of approaches around the world. I think these are things that we all want to see. I mean, again, what advice or what would you like to see to accelerate some of this, guys? Maybe Diane, maybe start with you on that. Obviously, that's something I know you've traveled. The CBP has been proactive traveling the world, I know, the last few years, talking to other agencies to try and drive some common thought here.
I think the travel is important for us because of learning of the different opportunities that are out there, staying engaged with our biometric industry partners, looking for those new technology developments. As I mentioned earlier, simply not able to do it on our own, and looking you know, for the industry to get us that critical feedback on the availability, and frankly point out the opportunities for us. federal government isn't always synonymous with innovation. We try and be. But certainly have learned a lot, rolling out this program over the last several years that, I think has really put CBP at the forefront of innovation, I think, frankly, for the federal government.
Yeah. And we're seeing some good harmonization with the TSA as well in recent times as well, that I think really helps the airlines and airports feel good about those investments, that you guys are seeing things on the same page, which is important. And Dave, from your perspective, I know you're involved in a lot of the working groups in some of these areas. Are you happy with the progress that's being made in some of these areas?
Yeah, and we need, yes, there's been progress. We also need a lot more too. I do a lot of work with ACI COVID groups, trying to come up with, convince people, make it safer to travel. And a big challenge there, the same idea, the same problem is I need a certificate that's recognized worldwide, not just locally. So I want to fly to Hawaii, fly to Europe, Asia. I need a certificate that's recognized everywhere. The same idea with facial recognition. If I fly out, it works great here, but coming home, it's a different credential, that's just not going to work. So we need a universal credential for both biometrics and certainly for health certificates. And
should that come from ICAO? Who should be formalizing that?
I think IATA is driving a lot of that. So it needs to be an industry group for sure, and government plays a role as well.
Yeah, very good. Christian and Rafi, do you want to comment on this? And maybe that ties into another point about, are health passports going to be tied to biometric programs going forward? I mean, I think this looks to me like a really important use case.
I believe so. And if you look at some of our implementations that we recently have been doing in Hawaii, we actually have a contract with the state of Hawaii to install elevated body temperatures at the gate. So when the passengers actually come in, we can detect their temperature, and then that would use to protect the health of the employees and the state, obviously citizens, and obviously the passengers as well. But related to that is this health passport and the process of making sure that the biometrics, the health passports, we actually do see a significant integration of the two together going forward, and how we can actually provide not only a identity of the individual, but the health passports as well. So we're working with partners to be able to bring that, and Hawaii is a very good example of where we will be launching that around, I think, December timeframe, as we assist with the opening of that state. So yes, we do see that. And I think it's part of our overall, what we call our digital identity platform, providing a secure identity. And I like what Christian said, because I think if we have this digital identity that could be used not only for aviation, but through other, as I mentioned, through our life touch points, health, education. A lot of us are filling, our parents are filling out forms certifying that their children, like going back to school, they are they are healthy, they don't have a temperature. I think all of those apps could be consolidated into one and provide one secure digital identity with multiple touch points and validation points. So, and obviously the health passport is going to be a big part of it. So yes.
Yeah, great. And Diane, I take it you're thinking about this in US CBP as well. What's your take on the health passport tie-up?
With respect to the health passports, or frankly, health data in general, we really do defer to the medical experts on it. So any way that we receive the information, it's got to be evaluated by medical professionals, where our decision point is, at the recommendation of whether it's HHS or ultimately CDC at the ports of entry, or even local or state public health officials. That's where we really rely on interpreting that data, and ultimately a standardization of that data. We would welcome the opportunity to have further discussion on that. We'll say a little separate from the health passport. We did recently observe the Common Pass pilot that kicked off between London and Newark, and we're continuing to evaluate that. We didn't have an operational role in that, but certainly looking at every opportunity where we can add value to the process.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're watching that with a lot of interest, the Common Pass. I'm glad you referenced that. So no, we're out of time, guys, but that was a really exciting session. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope you all did out there in our audience too. Obviously, I'd really like to thank all of our speakers for their for their participation today to support efforts to drive the industry forward during these challenging times. I think there's no doubt that biometrics is part of the future. I think we've all proven that again today with everything you've said. So I think that was really fascinating. And we have another break between conference sessions now. So why not use this as an opportunity to visit our exhibition hall and check out the inspirational booths from a long list of pioneering exhibitors, just like NEC, who have their team on standby, I'm sure, to share their latest solutions and news with you. And we have another part 2 of this Biometrics Summit tomorrow, which is, as I said, a pure panel discussion. And I'm pleased to say we have the likes of TSA and Delta and the Biometrics Institute involved in that session as well. So we say plenty more to come on that front. I really appreciate everyone's participation and your time out there today, and enjoy the rest of the show. Welcome back, everyone. It's Daniel Coleman from Future Travel Experience again, and I'm delighted to tee up the second session of our dedicated Biometrics Summit for Virtual Expo, which we have developed in close collaboration with our key show partner, NEC. Hopefully, you all caught the fantastic session we broadcast yesterday with Diane Sabatino, the new Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner at the Office of Field Operations at the US Customs and Border Protection Agency. We had Christian Drager, the VP Customer Experience at Star Alliance, and Rafi Berakin, the Senior Vice President and Chief Experience Officer at NEC, and Dave Wilson, the Director of Airport Innovation at the Port of Seattle, who delivered visions and case study insights on biometrics projects they have been rolling out recently. It was fascinating stuff and sets us up perfectly for today's panel session, where the core goal is to facilitate an important discussion on how we can overcome the challenges to the mass adoption of biometrics. I moderated yesterday's session, but I'm delighted to keep it in the family today and pass the baton to Joe Leader, the CEO of Apex and IFSA. Now, Joe does a brilliant job leading Apex and IFSA, but you might be surprised to learn he is a real subject matter expert on biometrics. And this was actually a subject identified as a key focus area for Apex by the Apex and IFSA Board of Governors at last year's AGM. So he's the perfect man to lead the discussions. And Joe, the audience is all yours. Good luck.
Dan, thanks so much for that great introduction. As Daniel said, the Apex and IFSA Board of Governors, consisting of some of the world's leading CEOs and presidents, really focused in 2020 that biometrics would be a critical area for us to advance. The timing could not have been more perfect, because if you look at COVID-19, it's made for a much more touchless experience wherever possible. And many of our suppliers have worked quite ingeniously to make certain that in a new masked world that there are more biometric options than ever. So with that quick introduction, what I'd like to go and begin with first is a joint presentation by 2 different branches from within Customs and from Customs and Border Protection and the Transportation Security Administration here in the US. I'd like to go ahead and start with CBP with Neil Samha giving a presentation. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon. We're just gonna real quick cover some quick background, on the technology that we're using within CBP, and assisting, well, of course, integrating with TSA and walk through the technology, describing how it works, and then getting into the very specific detail in terms of our integration with TSA. With that said, I just want to go quickly into background of this initiative. As you know, we had a congressional mandate dated back to 2001, where we need to control our exit biometrically. Our goal, obviously, is to identify and implement a solution to develop and deploy a comprehensive biometric verification system for the agency with minimal impact on trade travelers and of course, providing seamless integration into our existing process. Of course, cost effectiveness is important for us. We took that approach forward, to avoid any challenges in terms of biometrics verifications. Fast forward 2016, I want to give some credit, honestly, to where it belongs. We took our initial pilot with Delta, with our partner in crime, and obviously the industry and leading industry, obviously NEC, who had helped us in terms of coming up with some sort of a hardware to capture and do images and so forth. So that was very successful to the point where we actually had everyone's eyes open and they want more, and the more comes. So with that said, just moving on to describing the technology with TVS. As you know, majority of you know that the travel verification system that we built it as a backbone service available to be provided within our agency, to our sister agencies, or any industry or airlines out there that's actually wanting to join this effort as a whole. It's very important, as you know, that this effort is a joint effort. We could have not done it by ourselves, obviously. It's a joint effort with TSA, joint effort with the industry, with the airlines. So we had to have, the collectively work for with the industry and the airlines and airport authorities, and of course other agencies within the government. So we built the travel verification service leveraging the cloud. It's basically a biometric based technology system that matches images captured at the port of entry or exit to the images that's actually in CBP's holdings. So think of it this way. Some folks were really in the beginning was worrisome about what images are you taking and how are you doing with this? How are you keeping it? Think of it this way. I mean, the whole point of this whole application or service is to having you to travel, provide travel, seamless travel, basically travel without having to introduce your passport to every stop that you stop seeing an officer or agent or so forth. So you want to move this boarding pass out of your hand. You want to move the passport, keep it in your pocket, and your face is your token into getting you from curb to gate, meaning from the time you initiate your travel all the way through until we get to where we wanted to your destination at the gate. Obviously, we're working with the airport authorities and the airlines. We have that system available to verify that this person standing in front of the camera is who's they're intending to travel. We verify against our travel itinerary that our travel APIS information manifest that we get anyways in the airlines, from the airlines, and we compare that to that small flight. I will refer to it as small n for a small number on the flight, and give a response back to the device or whatever camera you're using at that point, and actually verify that traveler information is indeed who they are. With that said, let's see here. Jason, if you want to flip. Yep, thank you. So we had developed obviously the backbone to service these, what I just mentioned. The technologies, as mentioned, is built to become more similar to large scale systems such as Netflix and YouTube. Although YouTube got a hit a couple of weeks ago with minimal 10 minutes outage. But really, the Netflix and YouTube, with that in mind, that's what we want to build. That's what we want to have that service available within CBP to be able to support bigger volume of travel, obviously, especially when integrating with TSA. We are also using the best facial matching algorithm as endorsed by NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. And also, we built it to scale, so to handle all the international inbound travel, outbound flights to the US and pre-clearance locations as well. And one of the most important things I want to mention here is one of the tools that we used, actually, the matching algorithm that we used as of March 2020. We have our friends from NEC. We use their algorithm, obviously, version 1, 2, and obviously as of March, we implemented version 3 of the algorithm, which helped quite a bit in terms of matching. It provided fixes for the mating matches images that were probe images or photo in the target photo were significantly better, resulting in more positive matches, better performance with poor quality photos. It just enhanced all the issues that we have in the past. Let's see here. So the process works very simple, as I described. It's you take the photo, you do the match against what we built, and provide a response back. Our SLA obviously is 2 seconds, which means SLAs of service level agreement is 2 seconds. We've actually gone a lot less than 2 seconds at this point, and in terms of full round trip from the time we take the photo and return back the response to the airlines or to the machine that's taking the photo. Next page, please. I think I covered majority of our technologies but as I mentioned, really, this is the latest and greatest technologies. What I want to mention here, this in terms of volume, just to put it in perspective, in the air environment alone, we get almost 1.2 million APIS transmissions in the air alone in the US for the US. So when we're working with TSA, we realized that that's going to expand by double, triple actually. But we kept that in mind. So that's what we're building and so forth, you know, the scalability within our systems to allow that to happen, leveraging the cloud, the algorithm to handle this. And again, industry best practices you use as well. One other point that I want to mention here, just to get the airlines and get our friends from the airport authorities and other offices interest into this technology. We built everything that we had within our technology in something called the travel application system in a box, meaning it's easier for us to actually at that point to integrate with others without having you be on our network, our secure network. So that helped out quite a bit actually by exposing this to the industry, exposing this to the airlines, exposing this to our TSA and other agencies. This way they can use the same technologies that we built and get comfortable with it. And when it's ready, it's time to, like they say, rock and roll, we get back into the network and we make the connection and make things happen. So this worked really, really well for us. It's a really good success stories, honestly, to have this collaboration from all around. As I mentioned, the industry, the airport authorities, the airlines, our sister offices, TSA, and others. So this is really has been a great journey to take it together. Next slide. Let's see. Obviously, one thing that I haven't mentioned in this one here is just the we're working so that we can avoid outages. Mainly, if an airline late travelers are coming in late, they change their check-ins information, the travel information. We had actually made it available 6 hours in advance, or even more than that in case of, you know, there's a flight detention or a flight diversion or so forth. We're not getting the information. Somehow we have a buffer, or our network goes down, or the system doesn't come back up. We have a buffer of about 6 hours to allow for us to actually get those travelers checked in and match against and release back to allow them to travel. We are working on, you know, at this point, like I said, 1.2 million travelers on an average day. But we're building this to extend, actually, to allow for almost billions and billions of records for travelers, so that we can actually allow other offices within the government and other agencies to use our service. I believe with that said, I want to pass this on to Jason, if you want to go to the next one. Before we get into this, I want to introduce Jason. He's our expert from TSA who had made this happen, really, this integration that he's going to speak with. But this is another example of our success story of integrating our sister offices together and make the curb to gate journey actual reality in working with TSA and providing the travelers a seamless integration. With that said, Jason, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Niall. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Jason Lim. I'm the Identity Management Capability Manager at TSA. Our portfolio at TSA, our mission is really to develop a cohesive and consistent strategy to ensure that all the identity management functions across TSA are pulling in the same direction to enhance mission capability. To that end, one of our major work stream is to introduce biometrics at TSA at the checkpoint at a station, what we call a travel document checker position, TDC, where you hand over your ID and as well as scan your boarding pass in order to make sure that your ID is authentic and you match the photo on the on the ID. Your boarding pass tells us your flight reservation, your right to be there, as well as your secure flight vetting status. So it tells us whether you are pre-check, standard, or select D at this point. Right? Based on all that, you are directed to the appropriate screening lane to receive the right level of physical screening. So we started on this journey with CBP about 2.5 years ago, when CBP per Niall created the system called TVS that does one-to-end facial matching, facial identification capability that they were using for their exit mandate. So, what we were curious about, we wanted to investigate whether we could leverage the same technology to actually process or automate the ID verification at our checkpoint. The biggest difference being that CBP could only process international travelers, obviously, because that's their mission space. Plus, can TVS really scale up to TSA volume? Because at that point, TVS, it builds galleries on a flight-by-flight basis. So it can have, on the gallery, typically 300 to 500, but TSA, our checkpoint was up to 10,000, 20,000. So, with that increase in volume, can it scale up? So we started on this kind of iterative journey to test out different capabilities and try to integrate on a functional basis to create really a holistic integrated system to automate ID verification at the checkpoint. The first pilot was back in October of 2017 at JFK, in which really, kind of put TVS system with a camera next to our checkpoint and process the international outbound passengers at, I believe it was Terminal 7. And the end at that point, the volume was 10,000. And after a couple of weeks or so, TVS really proved capable. It scaled up to that volume and also returned match results less than 2 seconds. So we decided to take that to LAX for phase 2A. So LAX, we did a little more integration. We actually did security using TVS, in which the international outbound at Thomas Bradley International Airport were processed and matched using TVS, the matcher. And then, our officer would do their thing by scanning the boarding pass in order to ascertain your flight, secure flight status and whatnot. So we did that side by side about 2 months, and the volume doubled from the JFK Terminal 7 to about 20,000 because it consisted of the whole terminal. And also in TVS, even in this case, really proved to be capable, as well as it gave us more lessons learned to further integrate in from the process perspective, as well as derive requirements from a technology perspective. Then we've moved on with Delta as a partner with Atlanta in order to kind of fully make that terminal into a touchless biometrics terminal, in which Delta would leverage TVS for the check-in as well as backdrop, and TSA would also leverage TVS for the checkpoint. And of course, there's the boarding part of that process as well. So based on all these lessons learned, what we're really driving at, what we're really excited is in come early next year, working with CBP and Delta, we are about to pilot a touchless pre-check experience for our customers. So what that means is that we have integrated CBP's match results using their TVS with TSA secure flight vetting status and the flight reservation status. So basically there's no two separate different activities that you have to engage in. Just go up there if you decide to participate, have your photo taken, and all those information, all those data will be integrated and presented as a cohesive whole to the TSO to make that go or no go decision. So let me walk you through that process from a passenger perspective. But before we get started, one thing to note is that we are reserving, we're developing this truly tokenless and a touchless experience for the pre-check customers only. By pre-check, I mean TSA's pre-check application members, and as well as CBP's global entry members, plus other subpopulation, about 20 plus million at this point. That used to represent about 14 to 21% of the traveling volume every day before COVID. So it's a significant population, and it's a population that have already opted in into a program in order to get expedited screening based on the data that they opt in to share. So because of a lot of privacy issues and also the availability of the face of the photograph to match against, we have limited the participation for this pilot and for this program, this ability for pre-check touchless to that pre-check population. So I want to make that clear that this is a kind of a really focused solution for this significant, well-traveled population. So if you are a Delta frequent flyer at this point for this pilot, and you have a Delta mobile app, once you make this reservation and you're flying out of Detroit, and you can be either domestic or international, and that's one of the bigger differences, right? It's not just limited to international only. If you're pre-check and if you are international or domestic, it really doesn't matter at this point with this data flow. So you check in on your mobile app, and then as you check in, you'll be prompted to consent. You will be presented with a language, right? Consent language, notice language, and you'll be prompted to consent to participate in this one-to-end pilot, in this pre-check touchless pilot using your Delta app. So basically, we have included an additional explicit consent mechanism here, as you can tell. The pre-check and global entry is already an opt-in program, but we have included a itinerary specific, really, a consent mechanism for this pilot in order to make sure that we have that traceable consent for that passenger to participate in this pilot. Then based on that, what happens is the magic happens in the back end. We have developed a joint data architecture between TSA and CBP in which we have built an orchestration layer that takes that consent, takes that pre-check status, takes that biographic of that passenger who have consented, then sends that information to CBP to pull the photo from the passport, and then stage that photo for that passenger for that day, for that location. So when number 4, that passenger approaches the terminal to fly out that day, and he or she has already checked in, she approaches the queue, and for this pilot only, there will be a Delta representative at the checkpoint to confirm the consent indicator on the boarding pass, as well as direct the passenger to the appropriate screening lane so that we don't have strays or people who have non-consented accidentally straying over into our pilot lane. Then once you approach it, there'll be a endpoint device that captures the live photo of the passenger. That's going to be orchestrated on the back end so that TVS will return a passenger's live photo. Well, the TVS will make that match from 6 and 7 and return that data that correlates that they'll match the identity against the photo, as well as TSA secure vetting status for that identity, and return all that to a user interface that TSO, our officer, will be looking at to make the security decision. And number 8, this is only limited for this pilot because this truly is a prototype pilot. We want the passenger, for some phases of this pilot, to insert the ID documents into an ID scanner they will be having in order to ground truth that identity against the ID. And you'll appreciate while we're doing this because we need to be able to test the false positive identification rate and as well as false negative identification rate for this technology in order to make sure that those metrics meet our requirements, right? So this is a way we have designed the testing into this process in order to draw those metrics to validate our requirements. So based on all that, the TSO will direct you to the appropriate screening lane. And throughout this process, both with CBP and TSA, privacy has been foremost in the design development of this, not just the process technology, but also the people, process technology, the overall system. So we have incorporated privacy consideration into each phase of the solution development. And as and we analyze, assess potential privacy impacts and address them in a publicly available privacy impact assessment, PIAs. And we have met with privacy advocacy groups, and we have been transparent and proactively in trying to mitigate any concerns and risks they bring up to us. So, from a TSA and CBP perspective, as we develop this, touch list for pre-check, privacy has been foremost in our minds. And with that, I'd like to conclude our presentation, and we'll be open to questions.
Very good. Jason, Niall, thank you for that great presentation. What I'm going to do to maximize our time is I'm going to go directly into introductions and questions for each of our panelists. I'm going to go ahead and start off with Isabel Moeller, the Chief Executive of the Biometrics Institute. Isabel, one of the questions that I have as we go through a COVID-19 world is, how will biometrics play a part in the recovery and delivering the contactless experience that we all want in the airport and airline environment as much as possible?
Thank you, Joe. Really interesting presentation. And of course, CBP, a long-term member of the Institute. So very good to hear, all the good practices, obviously, that are being put in place. It's nothing new, Joe. I mean, seamless travel has been a conversation of our members for a long time, and there are several initiatives such as the IATA One ID and World Economic Forum Common Pass. And our members and border agencies and aviation have talked about this for a long time. It's just really that, interestingly enough, we talk about touch points in airports, and I think that's what's really changing now. They have to become touchless, and of course, biometrics have a critical role to play in that process.
I agree with you, and that leads me now to Greg Forbes, the Managing Director of Airport Experience at Delta Airlines. We saw in the presentation given some great pictures, and we also see Detroit as a hub airport for Delta, Greg. One of the experiences that I've been privileged to go through is when I go through Clear. I don't have to show my boarding pass, or I don't have to show any ID. It simply looks at my eyes. Then I go straight through and I'm waved through by an agent. How does this advance Delta's mission of serving customers in really a digitally secure way where they can trust and know that Delta's not doing something extra, capturing their identity in this process?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Great to be here. So we articulated our vision for the future during CES earlier this year. And what we showed is just smooth, easy transactions at each and every touch point. And really our ambition is to bring that to every single customer. What we think is really critical is the public-private partnership with CBP and TSA. And a lot of the security by design, privacy by design that has gone into the programs that they've created and that we've contributed to, I think hits the mark, striking a balance between the ease of use and convenience while still doing it in a way that respects privacy and keeps customer choice as part of the equation.
I agree with that entirely. One of the things I always like to point out is 100% of passengers going through today are already biometrically identified. It's simply by an agent looking at their identification versus their actual photo. What's amazing behind all of this is the technology. So let me pose the next question now to Chris Aranganath, the Chief Technology Officer of Advanced Recognition Systems and Digital Platforms at NEC Corporation of America. Chris, as we look forward, how can we address the issues about data security and privacy that Greg just mentioned as we really circle all the issues around biometrics and air travel?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. As you know, we worked with CBP, and 2 weeks ago, we launched the Star Biometrics Hub. Both of these are centralized identity management. So now we are looking at how can we extend this program to a decentralized identity where we let the passenger to manage their own identity using their own mobile phone, and also decide, through their own consent, decide when to share the data for their domestic as well as international travel. I think by giving more flexibility to passengers and giving them an option to show that they are managing their own identity and they're storing their data in their own mobile phone, I think will help them to relax a little bit and get into this program. So that's where we are making some progress. And also, obviously, if the data is with the passenger and we have enough security built into that, it also adds, it gives more comfort to the passengers. Today, even in a centralized identity management, we have, extreme security. For example, even the facial template, what we store in the database today, it is encrypted. We are also looking at, can we use a cancelable biometrics type of technology to not only keep the encrypted template, but even the template, once we use that, it is not usable again, for a second use. We are adapting these type of technologies. I think the decentralized identity will also give passengers, more comfort and probably get them into this program.
That's very good. And that is, speaking of comfort and positive surprises, that now I want to go ahead and address this question to you. And since we didn't get to do a full introduction, Niall Samha is the Director of Passenger Systems and Biometrics at the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So now, as we go forward, one of the great positive surprises before COVID-19 hit earlier this year, when I came back from Costa Rica, I'm used to going through global entry, putting down my passport, going through a series of questions and being verified. Instead, I was magically verified instantly and went straight through. And again, when I returned this past week from the Maldives, same experience. So is part of this kind of a surprise and delight moment where making the re-entry into the US or the departure from the US even easier?
Thanks, Joe. This is definitely one of our goals. Is we focused initially on the exit process to meet the mandate and be able to control our exit process. But in the back of our head, entry was absolutely as important as exit, and that was certainly the way. And I appreciate your feedback that you've given us from your travel. That was certainly our goal in mind is to get these passengers to not wait in lines, to actually. If you traveled before, we know who you are, you traveled multiple times, there's no reason for you to stay in the line or actually speak to anyone other than welcome back and welcome back home, and you walk right through. So these scenarios were designed and developed in mind actually to provide this seamless travel journey for the travelers coming back home or travel visitors or what have you. This technology is there. This is only the tip of the ice, honestly, where we're talking about exit and we're talking about entry and so forth, but there's a lot of scenarios out there that we're still looking into providing further, integrations with, TSA and others, where we provide these tools to make your journey even faster and more efficient and more enjoyable. So
that's a great point, because even for international visitors to the United States, now you don't have to do the retaking of photos and going through the process. It recognizes you from your last trip where you fully registered. And that leads to a great question. If I can ask Jason Lim to turn off, to unmute your microphone. Jason Lim, the Identity Manager and Capability Manager of the Transportation Security Administration within the Department of Homeland Security. Jason, one of the key issues that we've faced as an industry is there's been customs in the US, there's been Customs and Border Patrol, and then there's also been the TSA. Now, how have both organizations come together on the same page moving forward about integrating biometric technologies, making it a seamless experience for all customers?
Yeah, that has been a really great story of leadership, really, starting from the very top. So we took our leadership intent, mutual leadership intent, and said that although CBP and TSA are, in different mission space, and we have different target population that we regulate and we process, we serve, we managed to create a technology, or basically a joint data flow on the back end, in order to leverage, not have to rebuild from scratch, right? Leverage what CBP has built, and take that capability and orchestrate that ability in order to service our customers to make their experience much more touchless and much more convenient, right? As well as enhancing security. I think that's key, right? So it's not just the passenger experience, but it's our operational efficiency as well as security effectiveness that's being enhanced. And to do that on a parallel path, we also worked with our policy folks, with our privacy officers, with our IT security folks, in order to ensure that passengers' privacy, the transparency, the notice, the consent, all the privacy pillars have been respected and designed into the system in order to allow us to do this. So it has been a great story overall, and we look forward for this pilot next year.
Well, congratulations on all the advancements moving forward. It's great to see both the TSA and CBP working in an aligned manner around a single biometric facial recognition. That leads me to my next question, because we are going through a tight time period for all of our airlines. Every airline, every airport is saying, I need a return on my investment. So Isabel, how are you going and advancing the idea of biometrics is not a nice to have, but a need to have for airlines and airports to enable their success as we go through the COVID-19, time horizon of priorities?
Well, thanks, Joe. I guess the answer's already there. I don't need to sell it. I mean, biometric is in your passport and we already travel with it. So, I mean, you're building on a platform, on a tool that already exists. So, and as I said earlier, the initiatives are already underway. So it is, of course, challenging at a time when the aviation industry is really cutting costs where they can to find ways to take this time as an opportunity to make further investments. That's a balancing act. And I guess, again, the answer is collaboration, certainly somewhere around public and private partnerships. But, there is no going back. It's already underway, as you can see in the CBP example, but also, other airlines, as you mentioned, Star Alliance last week made an announcement. I know that in the Middle East, there's several airlines looking at it. So it will happen. So, it will take time to have these conversations.
Well, and one of the biggest investors thus far in biometric technology in the US, Delta has been a very assertive adopter of the new technology. So turning to Greg, I've watched an evolution. So I've done, dozens of trips on Delta and other airlines through this. And I've seen some airlines remove, for example, the finger pads that have been historically used to gain access to their lounges. How has Delta pivoted in terms of, can I still go through with my face mask on? Do I need to take it off? What are the changes that you've made in the light of COVID-19?
Thanks, Joe. Really, there hasn't been many changes with regards to biometrics. As you said, we did have a legacy fingerprint entry program for Sky Clubs. But when it comes to biometrics, boarding, at bag drop in Atlanta and things, really it's been a continuation of a multi-year path that we've been on. And this is where we recently did a safety risk analysis on manual review of passports during boarding versus biometrics. And it's Delta's policy to manually review all passports to make sure that the identity of the passenger boarding is confirmed, as well as that they do have their passport with them. And if you think of passing a physical passport from the customer to the agent and back is a risk of contamination. And to make that pass at arm's length, the agent's much closer to the customer than using biometrics. With biometrics, we can keep the customer at a greater distance from the agent. And also, a lot of times we have the agent positioned behind plexiglass shields that we've installed on the counters. So the results of that safety risk analysis showed that biometrics during COVID conditions was a good way to reduce the risk of spreading virus from agent to customer.
That's excellent. That's great that you really did that risk analysis, and it showed, very beneficial both to customers and your key team members there at Delta. Chris, turning to you with a similar question. One of the central points we've seen as we go through this, going through this year, is we have such a high correct technology identification rate when we have a customer that is unmasked. I've seen numbers north of 99%. When we take the same software and are dealing with a smaller and smaller uncovered area, it surprised me. I've seen numbers as high as 95%. Do you think that may, in fact, over time be a software change that's done by technology leaders like NEC, where they say, okay, let's see if we can do a correct biometric identification with mask on. If we can't, we'll ask them for a second take. What's your technological view as a CTO on the issue?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So, if you look at Star Biometrics verification service, this was supposed to go live even a month ahead, sometime in, I think, June, July. We delayed that program because we wanted to see how can we improve our technology to have the passengers go through this airport while wearing the mask. So the Star Biometric solution, what is in Munich Terminal 2 today, if you're a passenger, you do not have to take out your mask. You can simply use that verification service. And the technology in that verification service is already trained to overcome this mask issue. And we do see accuracies upwards of 98%. And we are, of course, continuously monitoring and improving this technology. So with all this innovation and advances in deep learning technology today, incorporating a mask into facial recognition is not a very big task. And we are actively investing our resource to address this issue. And we have a live program today in Germany. And we will, of course, continuously monitor and observe and see how we can further improve the technology.
That's great that you're working towards that technology, because I think it will have a long-lasting positive impact even when we move beyond this horizon. So now that brings the next question to you. And I wanted to ask, when customers today go through CBP, one thing that I noticed, I had a clear mask. So it's one of those N95s that is actually a clear custom cut face shield. So I was allowed to use my passport with that, but people traveling with me were asked to remove their mask for just as a secondary identification check. At what point do you believe that global entry and that biometrics check will be enough, and there won't be need to be checks by secondary agents as individuals enter the country?
Thanks, Joe. That's a good question. I mean, it's a learning experience, right? At this point, when we first started, the match rates were really low in terms of matching and so forth. We developed it. We have our scientists look into it as well, working with the industry as well, the NEST folks. It's continuous improvement on what we're doing. I think we're getting there as far as global entry goes. Just to answer your question, getting folks to be processed. We're looking into, and be honest, this is future things that we're looking into right now. You just described one of the projects I'm personally also leading in terms of integrating biometrics in our secondary processing. As far as we know who these individuals coming in, we're doing extra confirmation. It's the same as you're coming in and out. It's just another process you're going through, but it'll be automatically run through biometrics and able to give responses back to the officers who's actually deemed working these passengers. But like I said earlier, it's a work in progress. The algorithm, again, better and better by the day. We're at the high 90 percentile in terms of matching. I don't see, and honestly, Joe, I don't see an issue or seeing that far away from actually implementing this in our global entry environment as well.
That's a fun point to go to. A question to Isabella here, because one of the areas that I've seen when you talk about that, initially there was not a great match rate, and the match rates that I've seen as technology has developed have been incredibly high. But there'll always be people that try to hack the system, Isabel. So what do we do with those that attempt to hack with disguises? If you have, like my brother David Leader looks remarkably like me, so it might be close enough for an individual to accept our identities as one another. I'm kind of dubious. I think the computer would catch us if we tried it as individuals. What do you do with the hackers in the world that are out there that try to hack the system in a bad way?
I mean, it is still a border environment, and even some countries have requirements that there have to be officers present. And anyway, when people have issues getting through the gates, they get diverted. This is for entry, for exit is similar, obviously, and small differences in different countries. So I think for anyone to try and just pretend being someone else is, in that particular environment, a bit more challenging. But of course, our industry always works hard on, like Chris said, you know, the technologists are constantly improving. Organizations like NIST, the National Institute for Standard and Technology, are working on testing, ensuring you know your algorithms, you look at the liveness detection and the presentation attack detection systems. So it's always a bit of a, you know, catch-up game or leading the game, but I think it's well addressed by our industry.
I would agree with you. And one of the reasons why this initially came in particular for exit is there were occasions where CBP would catch individuals that were using someone else's identity to exit. And that became a really important rallying point, because in different countries, there is actually a hard border where you have to go by exits. In the United States, we've typically delegated that to simply exiting with their airline personnel, but biometrics has provided additional layer. Jason, turning to you now with that question. Additional layer, I think about people going through checkpoints and having exact match. So for example, an individual going through with their boarding pass and their facial ID, as we move forward, as we move past the pilots, is this going to become as seamless as what I do now when I go to the airport? I no longer in Atlanta hand over my boarding pass. I simply hand them my ID and they'll match me almost immediately when I go through TSA. In the rare case that there's not a match, then they're doing some secondary checks. Is this the next phase where instead of taking my ID, it's simply my picture, and then I go straight through, it'll match me to the flight that I'm boarding under my name and everything is done?
Yeah, it's not the next phase, Joe. Actually, it's here. So we have been deploying the new machine called Credential Authentication Technology, CAT machines, that based on the name and date of birth and gender on your ID, we scan that, make sure it's an authentic ID, then we can pull your flight information, as well as your secure flight vetting status and all the other information that we need in order to process you for ID verification at the checkpoint. What we are doing right now, in addition to this pilot with Delta and CBP, we're adding a facial matching capability to that technology in order to match your live face to that photograph on the ID. Having said that, I just want to differentiate the two. What we talked about today that's reserved for the pre-check population is truly a touchless technology, right? Because you don't have to take out any token. You're not taking anything out. Your face is the token and it's automatically being matched. So you don't have to take out a separate plastic ID. However, what you probably experienced in Atlanta and what we are building for the rest of the domestic non-pre-check population, you do have to take out your ID. So although it's self-service and it's biometrics, there is an extra element of inconvenience per se in that process.
That's interesting, because and one of the advantages I think we have at some of our more major airports is the ability, if there's clear, of just having the retina scan without any additional secondary check. So I'll be curious to see how many travelers are out there that are like me, already members of Global Entry pre-check. If there's a clear station, I'm using the clear station. If there's not, then I would love another solution. And Greg, that leads me to a great question for Delta Airlines. So from the mega hub here in Atlanta to the smallest Delta airport I've gone to this year was West Yellowstone Airport, where there was one TSA line that was occasionally a person. Is this the type of solution where Delta envisions having it system-wide, or is it really based at airports of scale where there's a need for the technology to enhance passenger flow through?
Our intention with this is to be a solution that is consistent everywhere that Delta flies and for all Delta customers to choose. So that is our ambition, and that is the path that we're pursuing. A lot that's gone into the design choices, a lot of the hardware that we're looking at was with full scale in mind.
That's really well said. And so, Chris, that leads me to a key question for you from a technology implementation perspective. looking at small, medium, large scale airports, there's great economic returns for large scale airports, but it begs the question, are biometric solutions ones that are best to be implemented by airlines like the Deltas of the world, or individually at airports that have a larger number of carriers, for example, like I'm thinking of an airport like San Jose, California, where there's no dominant carrier and it needs to be the airport taking the lead. How do you divide up who takes the lead in which marketplace?
Yeah. So when you look at airport traffic today, especially domestic travel, majority of the passengers who go through airport are frequent travelers. Somebody like you. You know how to use the mobile, boarding pass, how to do mobile check-in. So if you take away some of these key touch points like check-in and boarding pass, then the two potential friction points are, bag drop, and another potential, friction point is boarding pass, the boarding gate. So what we are trying to do is, can we look at these two and try to come up with an inexpensive, cheaper solution, which occupies less space in the airport, but also provides this frictionless capability for both bag drop and boarding. If we do that as less, a cheaper solution, which occupies less real estate, I think many airports will be very much, very interested to adapt these type of technologies. I feel that this is a task which airports have to do, primarily because, as you said, like San Jose Airport, for example, there is no dominant carrier. So naturally, the airport should be able to provide an environment which accepts identity from multiple vendors and also, of course, government entities, and provide some identity interoperability and also an infrastructure for biometrics processing. So this should be more of an airport activity.
That makes complete sense. And I think about the seamlessness of it all. And I wonder, there's some parts as we go through this where I'm curious as to how they kind of got dropped from the passenger experience. So now this leads me to a question for CBP. One of the enhancements genuinely made for customers when they have been facially identified, there's no longer a list of questions. I recognize that when I did global entry, I promised that I would not bring more than $10,000 without declaring it and other things, but I used to have to go through a checklist. Is this a conscious decision to make it easier and easier to those trusted travelers that register with global entry that know the rules? Or was it something where you just said, to make this easier, we need to drop these questions? How is that solution arrived at?
Thanks, Joe. Another good question. No, so definitely wanted to have this obviously part of the seamless integration. I mean, trusted travelers as yourself and others, what else can we make? I mean, the next question that always we ask ourselves, what's next for these travelers? How else can we make their journey easier, faster, efficient? And definitely that's something on the radar. We looked at these questions and we thought perhaps to see how the process looks like. Is that going to interest the travelers more? Is that going to get acceptances? So there's always that trial of things, implement few scenarios and see what the reaction would look like for empowering the users, making them more easier, accepting the technology. So that's definitely something that we thought perhaps to provide as an enhancement to our process by allowing these trusted travelers, global folks to in and out really fast and efficient without having to do any of the answering and submitting and all the other stuff.
That's great. Well, Jason, leads me to a question to you from a different perspective. So one of the things that's been advocated for during COVID-19, certain airlines are already doing it and certain governments are already doing it, which is temperature checking as passengers go through checkpoints. TSA is not doing that, but one of the unique things is some of the cameras that are used do have the ability to do temperature checks. Is this something, has there been any discussion as we go through the COVID-19 health crisis saying, you know what, let's pilot this and see how these cameras do in this other function, which was not designed as their primary? or is the software been designed in such a specific way where it might take away from the overall program?
Yes. So there have been a lot of talk about temperature changes in the beginning stages of the pandemic and the shutdown, as you know. And I'm not the optimal person at TSA to speak to that because, I'm focused on the biometrics ID verification piece. But in terms of kind of dual use cameras, the cameras that we are using and will eventually use is probably optimized. We have optimized the cameras for our checkpoint. So what's important when trying to test the viability and the performance of the system or the biometric system at the checkpoint is that you got to be specific to the use case and to the environment and to the passenger. So it's not just the matching algorithm, which I have full trust in and see other industry partners to come through for us, even with the mask, ecosystem. However, it's the camera capture, the acquisition of the photo, the lighting conditions, the human factors, which is huge. How do passengers behave? How do you communicate what they need to do? So it's the overall system that we would have to test in order to get at the match performance that we want, right? So introducing a dual use or integrating other uses, and that creates a complication or introduces a complexity that kind of takes away from our focus on introducing facial verification at the checkpoint at this point.
Okay, that makes complete sense. Is sticking with the existing use case and not going off course. So let me ask a different health safety related question to Isabel. Isabel, will biometrics become tied to health passport efforts as we move forward? So once I receive my vaccine next year, do you think biometrics will play a part in that verification? Oh yes, that's Joe, and he had both doses.
Yeah, thanks. Very good question, and obviously very hot topic that is being discussed. And as you know, many countries are looking at track and trace apps, and that's created a lot of fear amongst the public in terms of surveillance. But coming back to your question, of course, we need to find a way to reassure people, you and me, that it is safe to travel. We need to assure the receiving countries that the passenger is someone they are willing to accept. We need to find solutions that really allow the sharing of data, but in a responsible way. And obviously, health data is another layer of sensitive information. There are international laws for travel that you need to consider. So there's health certificates. I mean, what do countries accept? If I'm tested here in the UK, the US might accept that, but maybe some other countries, they might not be willing to accept that. So there's standards needed. So it's a massive challenge, but of course also an opportunity. And, what we always say at the Biometrics Institute, there are ways of doing it, but we need to think really about the policy first, the processes next, and then what we can do in a technology solution, which is nicely summarized in the 3 laws of biometrics that we launched last month. So yes, absolutely, we have to have that conversation, but it's not an easy one to resolve.
I agree. That's a more difficult one. And let me touch on a more interesting and more difficult question with Greg from an airline perspective. So Greg, as we've gone through this new age of customers going through biometrically, I've seen some very different numbers from different geographies. For example, here in the US, a resistance rate to using the technology of 1% to 2%, depending on which study I've read, versus in some European countries, the numbers are as high as 20 to 25%, which was mind-boggling to me because I have to trust my identity. If of all places where I expect to trust that I am, presenting myself as myself, it would be before I board a plane. Where do you see the points of friction that need to be overcome in the customer experience for biometrics to be broadly accepted and embraced on a worldwide basis?
Yeah, Joe. So I should say that Delta is only operating biometrics at a large scale in the United States. So our experience has been more the 98 to 99% acceptance rate. And really, the key drivers for customer acceptance is, first of all, you have to demonstrate the value. And the way that we demonstrate the value is by designing all of the transactions to be one step. I can definitely see where a customer would question, okay, now why are you taking my picture for this? And then you also need to see credentials. And if you give the impression of things done haphazardly or not in a cohesive way, that's going to just dissolve the trust with the customer. One step, if we can get the regulatory compliance and our commercial needs accomplished in a single transaction that's quick, smooth, and easy, I think that it'll draw less confusion and therefore less distrust from customers. The only other thing that I would say is at Delta, we've really tried hard to make no enrollment steps necessary. And if enrollment is necessary, then to make it as lightweight as possible. I think that that's also really important, because if there's this lengthy data entry form and a kind of a cumbersome enrollment process, that is going to get an abandonment rate that people will get into the middle of it and say, what am I really handing over? Is this really worth it?
That makes complete sense. So that leads to the final question because of time limitations. Let's send this to Chris at NEC. So Chris, what are the hurdles that you see in 2021 for airline, airport, and customer adoption of all the great biometric technologies we've spoken about today?
I think it is probably the economy. It's not the technology. As you mentioned earlier, COVID has put stress on airports, airlines, pretty much all transportation industry. I think the adoption rate by all these entities will be driven by the return on investment. So what we are trying to do, I'm sure many other vendors are also trying to do this, is how do we make this cost of adapting this technology to reduce this cost, try to make it very affordable. And I think that's where our research and our development is focused on, especially when you go and tell an airport to retrofit their infrastructure. We have to make sure that the whatever investment they have to do is small. And I think if we make that happen, the adoption will continue and this will expand. Now, having said that, COVID has kind of reinforced this frictionless travel idea. Before COVID also, we were discussing about this. But now COVID has kind of put emphasis on this technology, that this is an essential technology. It is no longer nice to have technology. This is more of an essential technology. Hopefully airports and airlines will, I don't know where they will look, but they'll look around to find some fund to invest and provide this service.
Well, I hope that there might be, given the state of the industry, I hope that there are also pay-per-use possibilities in the future. I think that everyone will be looking to adopt the new technology, but to spread it out as much as possible to increase the adoption rate. To each of you, thank you for affording the time with our audience worldwide today. And I'll be turning it back to the studio and to Daniel Coleman.
Thanks, Joe. That was another really compelling session. And through the two sessions that we've staged through this virtual expo, both today and yesterday, I certainly feel our audience is far better equipped to take on a biometrics project. It's undoubtedly a technology that will be at the heart of the end-to-end passenger experience of the future. And we really do appreciate the participation and insights of the panelists today and yesterday, who really are amongst the most enlightened and experienced industry figures in this area, as you've heard for yourselves here. So we have another half an hour break between sessions, but Joe will be very busy again shortly as he leads the next session also, which unveils the Apex official airline ratings winners, and he'll present the Apex Lifetime Achievement Award to Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta Airlines. So thank you for your attention, and please be sure to visit the NEC booth on the exhibition floor before the show closes if you haven't already, to learn about how their solutions have helped many of the first movers in this space and how they might be able to help you with your efforts too. So thank you for your attention, and thank you so much to Joe, Chris, Isabel, Greg, Niall, and Jason, and thank you out there for your attention.